Trade steering in EU4. To clarify, trade steering can be used to refer to two related but different things. When you have trade power in a node, you can use that trade power to send, or more specifically steer, the trade value inside of the node somewhere else, assuming it's not an end node. This is frequently referred to in the community as steering trade, because that's what your merchant is doing. But on top of it being very self-explanatory, it's not what we're referring to today. When your merchant does the trade steering mentioned previously, he also multiplies the value of the trade being sent by a percentage modifier. The base amount is 5%, but it decreases depending on how many merchants are in the node, and if those merchants are above you in tag order. If tag order means nothing to you, you can see an explanation linked here. Anyway, the trade steering you see as a modifier in-game affects this percentage modifier. So 100% trade steering increases the multiplier from 5% to 10%. This is mostly negligible when your country is at the most involved in a few nodes, like every country in game start, but globe-spanning empires, as well as large colonial powerhouses, can utilize trade steering to make insane amounts of money. And when utilized in combination with every other economic modifier, it's the strongest one out of all of them, due to the multiplicative scaling. This description should be enough for 99% of the cases when you encounter it, but if you want a more in-depth explanation into the mechanic, feel free to stick around for the rest of the video. Okay, if you're still here, welcome. If you're feeling up to it, a like and a sub would be appreciated. All the self-shit out the way, let's continue. So, trade steering. It's beloved by many and it's a workhorse modifier of the game which, when fed a combination of powerful ingredients, can lead to game-breaking levels of wealth. And no, I do mean game-breaking, as in you have so much money your wealth stack overflows and you get into financial problems because you've hit negative amounts of money from the overflow. As far as I'm aware, I've only ever seen these levels of wealth be achieved through trade steering use, but people are welcome to prove me wrong. Anyway, enough of a free PR campaign for the game mechanic, let's talk about what it actually does. See, trade steering affects two things, but the first one is so irrelevant that most times you never really mention it. When you have a node without a merchant, your trade power that you have in that node from, say, provinces or upstream trade power still exists, but you're not actively steering the trade. Well, other countries usually are. And before we go further, I'm going to have to go into the game and show you some examples, because this is going to get incredibly complicated, and needlessly so, because it's an incredibly irrelevant mechanic. Anyway, example time. Here, we are playing as Austria, and I've done a month tick so that I could move my merchant out of Pest into Vienna, just to, get him out of the way. This leaves us with 2% trade power in this node. As you can see, 2% trade power in this node. So far, so good. But we're not steering this trade power, so it still exists. This means that the game needs to decide where this trade power goes. Every AI or player that has a trade power in the node they don't have a merchant in also happens to contribute to this pool of trade power that is not being distributed or steered. In this case, we have a bunch of HRE miners steering into Vienna, Vienne, and we have another bunch of HRE miners steering into Saxony. What happens is the trade power that isn't being steered is added into a pool, and the countries that are steering it use their trade power to divvy up the not steered trade. The game tends to yet again prove too complicated, so let's get into a much easier example. Let's imagine three nodes, A, B, and C, where the trade node C goes into A and B. We have one country, country A, steering into node A, and country B, steering into node B. We're going to give A 15 trade power, while B has 5 trade power in the node. So the ratio of the leftover trade power generated by another random country, we're going to call it C, which has trade power node without a merchant in it, would be split 75% A, 25% B. However, B has 200% trade steering, while A in our example has 0%. So actually, for the purpose of the spare trade power distribution, B's 5 trade power is going to be multiplied by 200% into 15 trade power. So the spare trade power is going to be split 50% A, 50% B. Notice how the trade steering did not increase the trade power of the country B. It still remains at 5 for the purpose of transferring country B's share of the wealth. However, countries B high trade steering allowed it to steal more money from the countries less involved in the node, aka ones without a merchant. Now, let's be clear, this is incredibly useless in practice. AI loves trade ideas and those comes with merchants. And furthermore, they don't expand as much as players, so they tend to have merchants pretty much everywhere, making it harder for you to steal percentage share. Furthermore, as a player, you tend to not get your own trade stolen too much either, as either you're a small country and have a few nodes, in which case the starting merchants tend to be enough, or you're a global spanning empire, in which case you get loads of extra merchants from trade companies and colonies. Now, I mentioned marginal applications, and I guess they exist in multiplayer. Say you're playing someone like France, and we have a player on England. Now, what you can do in this arrangement, as the France player, is negotiate with England saying, hi, I'm going to steer all of my trade, my Bordeaux trade, well, pretty much Bordeaux trade to be honest, not much goes into Champagne, and my expansions into Germany, my Rhineland trade, into Champagne with my merchants. Then I'm just going to leave Champagne be. I'm going to move my own trade capital into somewhere like Genoa. What then this lets you do is leave your trade power in Champagne as is, and let England put their merchant in Champagne. England will then steer that trade out of Champagne and subsidize you the money for the money you've lost steering the trade out of Champagne. Now, both countries profit here. England profits because they're probably making more money than, if they were before, and the subsidies they give you back are probably more money they're going to be making out of Champagne anyway. And this setup, compared to the percentage increase thing not happening before, saves France a merchant. So yes, in this specific case, and obviously you can do this with other countries, you can save a merchant if you have high trade steering, so you can transfer more of the passive trade power compared to countries that don't. But even when you have no trade steering buffs and you're the only other person steering that node, you are just going to pick up 100% of the passive trade power anyway. So in this very obscure example, it's still kind of useless. But it's a mechanic. So I have to mention it in a video that goes about this mechanic. So if anyone ever does an obscure EU4 trivia quiz, you can get a point knowing this really obscure fact. But let's be honest, this is useless. But with that out of the way, let's talk about the second ability of trade steering, its ability to steer wealth into existence, as it were. When a merchant is transferring trade, he takes some trade value out of a node, say 100 ducats, then he multiplies it by a base percentage value, let's say 5% for now, so that 105 ducats arrive at the next node. This 105 ducats becomes the base value arriving into that node and gets added to the base value of the trade in that node. Now, the percentage multiplier is determined by this table here, where your merchant's position is determined by tag order. And since you haven't clicked off to go watch the tag order video at the start, I'm going to assume you know what that means. From this point onwards, I'm going to assume your merchant is first in tag order, as you've either killed off every country before you in tag order to maximize your trade, or just negotiated with them in multiplayer to not be trade steering with you. Furthermore, my math becomes easier if I have to do it once and not 5 separate times for 5 separate percentages. Well, trade steering, as mentioned before, gives you a multiplicative buff on this percentage increase. So 100% trade steering value means that you get 10% multiplicative instead of 5%. This adds up very quickly. In essence, we can actually model this duplicating ability as a sort of compounding interest. As we have an initial deposit, the initial value of the node, then the final value when we collect. So when we have 100% trade steering, we can turn 100 ducats and shove it through 3 nodes. We can then turn that 100 ducats with 100% trade steering, so 10% multiplication, into 134 ducats. Neat. Now, let's say we're playing England. We have a lot of nodes. We've got our English Channel, we've expanded to the Ivory Coast. Now we have the trade steering from that. We've gone into the Cape, we've gone into Zanzibar, we've got into India, we've set up there, we've moved into Malacca, and then started establishing ourselves in China. This step goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and finally the final trade steer into the English Channel of 10. Let's also assume that at this point we have no trade steering buffs, just 5%. And to make math easier for everyone involved, we're just going to assume that every single trade node has a base value of 100 ducats, so we're collecting 100% of it, there's no leakage in, there's no leakage outside of it. Obviously, if you are in practice doing this from Canton, Malacca into Bengal, you can have trade power in Bengal, so Bengal's going to be nicking some stuff out of Burma and things like that. So again, we're just for the purpose of making the math easy. Well, if we were to look at the final trade node, we'll be looking at having a 1,429 trade value there, which means that 429 ducats appeared from nowhere from just trade steering. But now let's do the same thing again, but we're going to upgrade our trade centers to level 3 to get some naval tradition decay. And with some innovativeness and some other investments, we can get the naval tradition to rest at 100. Combined with 25 trade steering from picking up trade ideas, we are now looking at 125% trade steering, or an interest rate, for lack of a better word, of 11.25%. Now, at the end, we will actually have 2,048 ducats. With 10 trade nodes of trade steering, we have increased the base value of our trade by over 43%. And as before, trade efficiency multipliers make a difference. Now let's say we have a truly global empire. So the same example is England, we're going for China, but instead of going around everyone fighting back, we're just going to, do what the British should have done in real life. Get to China by going through Europe and the Middle East. Yes. So in this case, we're going to be having our trade being generated in Chengdu. It's going to be going to Canton, 1, into Hangzhou, 2, into the Xi'an, 3, into Yumen, 4. You're going to be then steering it into Samarkand, 5, into Persia, 6, into Astrakhan, 7, into Crimea, 8, into Constantinople, 9, into Ragusa, 10, into Pest, 11, into Vienna, 12, into Saxony, 13, into Rhineland, 14, into Lubeck 16, and finally into the English Channel 17. Now, I believe that while I did this talking, I think I accidentally missed a trade node or something, because when I did this earlier in my own calculations, I actually managed to get 18 nodes of trade steering. So instead of starting our nodes in Chengdu, we're actually going to start in Lhasa, since that's one extra step for us. So there we go, 18 nodes of trade steering. Going back to our previous example with 18 trade nodes where we have 100 trade value in each one, granted that's a bit more difficult, I doubt you'll be able to get 100 ducats out of Lhasa, but hey, maybe you're already into development, I'm just making the math easier as it were. What are we going to end up with in terms of our, well, math? So again, with that 100% starting ducats of every node, that gets added manually on top of the trade steering. With just no trade steering buffs at all, just the base value of having a merchant in each one of those, we're going to be ending up with 3,089 ducats by the end of it, with no trade steering buffs. Now, if we go to the trade steering buffs with the full trade steering from the Navy tradition and trade ideas, that exact same math lends us with 6,240 ducats. And that's with just 2 trade steering modifiers available to literally every single country in the game, or an effective 102% increase. So, that's trade steering. This is also a reason you should avoid taking credit cards as much as possible, since it's basically real-life trade steering, only the companies are making 20% from you instead of a 10% trade node. I mean, imagine how overpowered a country would be if you gave it 300% trade steering. But moral grandstanding aside, I hope you learned something new today, and if you didn't, I hope you at least enjoyed the video. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.